John Lothian News wants you to be safe and for us to be able to return to being with one another again. To get there, we need to do the following to beat this pandemic. Wear a mask, stay 6 feet apart, wash your hands for 20 seconds at a time, and self-monitor your temperature. Stay safe, stay smart.
Help capture the history of our markets by contributing to the John Lothian News GoFundMe campaign to support the Markets Wiki Education history-focused video series and more.
This entry in the Path to Electronic Trading series is sponsored by CQG.
The securities markets back well into the late 70s, felt that they had to find a way to better handle small orders in stocks. So the New York Stock Exchange and the American Stock Exchange and the CBOE each had ways of handling orders electronically on small orders. So the New York Stock Exchange had a system called DOT, which is the Designated Order Turnaround System. Later they enhanced it called Super DOT. It was originally good for small market orders, limit orders a little bigger. Amex had the same type of thing. They called it PER, which is post-execution reporting. And CBOE had a very interesting system called RAES, R-A-E-S, which was the Retail Automated Execution System. And interestingly, the CBOE's RAES system in the well into the 90s was handling a large percentage of the orders, but a small percentage of the volume. So it was a way of getting rid of a lot of the paper, but not taking a lot of the juice away from the traders who wanted to be trade against the big orders. No one wanted fully automated trading because the difference between the U.S. markets and international markets is that the exchanges, all these exchanges, the old ones as well as the CBOE, which is the newest, all had membership structures. And everything was based around the trading of the seats, or the ownership of the seats, the value of what was called the time and place advantage of the seat. And they felt that any time that you would bring a computer into the process, you would intermediate between the time and place advantage and interacting with the orders. So there was a tremendous opposition to any what was called the imposition of the black box. The black box was the code word for electronic trading. In the meantime, because of CBOE and the CME and CBOT trading financial futures, that all caught the attention of exchanges around the world. And not only exchanges, but financial communities. So whether it was London, Paris, Switzerland, Germany, Singapore, Japan, all these major financial centers wanted to trade financial futures and options. But they didn't have the kind of exchange structures we had in New York and Chicago. So they never had a problem in the 90s starting off with a fully electronic system for futures and options. So what we knew by 1997, 98, 99 is there was a thing called electronic trading, but it was not in my backyard. So there was tremendous amount of electronic trading in France and Germany, for example, on futures and options. All electronic, because there was no control by members on the trading floor to say not here. So on one hand, everyone knew it existed, but the traders in the U.S. who controlled the exchanges, they voted for the management. In other words, the exchange members, particularly in Chicago, were very powerful and didn't want electronic trading. So they basically were not only opposed to it, they were to a certain extent in denial. And it was a kind of a cold peace at the time until a fellow named Bill Porter, who had created E-Trade, one of the discount trading firms, which was an outgrowth of the Mayday era. I mean, the Schwabs, the Ameritrades, the E-Trades all came out of the post-75 unfixing of commissions. So they were doing electronic trading as a broker, but it wasn't electronic on the trading floor except for small orders. I came to the CBOE in 1997. It was kind of in the background. By 99, we knew that Bill Porter had teamed up with two guys from the New York Stock Exchange staff, Dave Krell and a fellow named Katz, who left the New York Stock Exchange staff to work for Bill Porter to create what became the International Securities Exchange, which would be the first electronic trading option market in the U.S. And they got very quick SEC approval because the SEC wanted more electronics. And I remember being at the CBOE at the time and saying, guys, we're going to have to do something. You can't ignore this, because by that time we had multiple listing. And ISE announced that they wanted to trade 600 of our most active stocks. So CBOE's membership, they saw it, but they go, electronic trading and options won't work. It's too complicated. The computers can't handle it. And we at the staff were very concerned that what if they're not, what if they're wrong, and how do we protect against it? So we went for in 1999, a vote of the membership to establish a fund to build a completely screen-based trading system for options. And it cost over $50 million. We had to get a vote, which passed, but not by a tremendous margin, to authorize the money. But the condition of the vote was you have to come back to the membership to get a vote to turn it on. The way we got the vote passed is two things. One, we had a very strong effort by the management to get out the vote, and we knew where the votes were, because remember, these were all seats. We knew who owned all the seats. We had a tremendous amount of firms, basically New York-based, the Merrill Lynch's, the Goldman Sachs's, the Payne Weber's, Bear Stearns, other firms who were controlled by people upstairs, not on the floor, even though the seats were used on the floor. And we told them we need to do this to preserve your franchise as a firm. On one hand, they were rooting for ISE because they knew ISE was putting tremendous pressure on us. On the other hand, they certainly sided with management. And then you had, on the floor side, people who were owners of seats, many of whom, by the way, who bought them in '73 for $10,000, who were getting tremendous amount of rent on those seats from lessees on the floor. So their interests were aligned with the lessees against electronic trading. So we had to get enough people who had seats from off the floor to vote against the people who were the lessors, who had interest in maintaining the lease values, and they thought that the floor was the be-all and the end-all, and never thought beyond that. And it was a very nasty, nasty thing. And I had a whole group of people. We had lists of who owned the seats. Very often they were widows of former seat owners. I mean, we went to everybody. We knew who not to go to. We knew who we had to go to. But the firms had big blocks of seats. A firm like Merrill Lynch could have had 35 seats at the time. So, with one phone call, you got 35 seats. And I remember at the time that it was a very, very hard-fought battle. But we did win by over 100 votes, but it was not overwhelming. So we had real resistance. And we built the system. But then there was tremendous amount of battle, because at the CBOE in particular, there was a mechanism in the Constitution that the members could petition about anything. And the petition power was very strong because they could overrule the management and the board. So that was very difficult. So, and they knew that. And so we built the system, but we never turned it on, the screen-based trading system. So in the meantime, ISE was eating our lunch. And with every passing day, it got uglier and uglier. And I looked and I go, I'm the chairman and CEO of this place. I don't want this place to go under on my watch. And so I was very, very concerned about it. In fact, it was so heated in terms of how this all was working. There were people wearing buttons on the trading floor that they wanted me out. They wanted me out, and they were wearing buttons on the floor. So one of the fun things I did, I told it to my wife, and she said, if you're so important that they have buttons with your name on it, I want one or two, and I want you to quit. I got her the buttons, but I refused to quit because I cared so much about CBOE as an institution, what it represented to the community and the financial industry, that I was willing to fight to the end to save it. And it was really a matter of saving it. And what we did is we ultimately compromised with the membership, and we were going to build what was called the hybrid system. But the hybrid system was a concept. It had never been done before on any exchange in the world, because exchanges either started as electronic or they started as on the floor, and there was nothing in between other than the use of small order execution, which did not satisfy the demands of an electronic world. And what we did there is we developed the hybrid system. It took a long time. We had to take the whole screen-based trading system and rewrite the code and hope that it would work, because what we were telling the firms is we're going to give you the best of both worlds. What did that mean? If you want to use electronics, we're not going to stop you. If you want to send the order to the floor on the system, it'll go to the floor. And we would also protect the sanctity of the limit order book. So there was a lot of good concepts. The question is, could we make it work? This process took from almost 5 years, from 1999 to 2004. By 2003, we were introducing the hybrid. It was very frustrating. It took so long to write the code. Then when we wrote the code and started introducing it, we went pit by pit, one pit at a time, to try to make it work. And we had lots of problems. And it was the integration that made it so hard. To a point where in the winter of 2003, when we were trying to bring it on, I had to bring in consultants because my own crew, they were so invested in it, they couldn't see the trees from the forest. So we had to bring some outsiders in. I remember it was during Christmas vacation, and I brought these consultants and I said, you got to help us because we can't survive the way we're going. So although the concept worked, the execution wasn't working the way we wanted it. And so it took us a long time. It was throughout 2004 until we fully made this thing work, and then it worked beautifully. And in fact, I remember having John Thain, who came from the New York Stock Exchange, he had replaced Dick Grasso as CEO, came to Chicago to have me show him the hybrid, because the New York Stock Exchange was now worried, what are they going to do? They had no technology. He ultimately bought Archipelago, which was then owned by the Pacific Exchange, and that they had an electronic system. So the New York Stock Exchange didn't even try to build it themselves. They bought another exchange to buy their technology. And Archipelago coincidentally came out of Chicago. A guy named Jerry Putnam from the North Shore had created an exchange called Archipelago to compete with another, what was called ECN, or Electronic Crossing Network, called Island. So there was Island, and he created Archipelago. And so the New York Stock Exchange watched what we did and copied what we did, because they were risking their future against purely electronic markets too. Because at that point, the SEC was allowing other exchanges to be formed without a lot of the hassle that CBOE had gone through. CBOE still has the hybrid system because the trading floor still exists, despite the COVID that we're going through right now. And the floor is still viable because it handles larger, complex orders. So not only does it handle it in the very important proprietary products of VIX or S&P 500, but it also is valuable in option trading in individual equities, because the screen can only handle a certain amount of size. When I say only can handle, it's only shown on the screen. But if you want to do 1,000 options or 10,000 options, you can go to that trading floor today and get a bid or an offer on a large amount of stock. So the value of the memberships and the trading floor is still there, much different than it used to be. But the growth of options is tremendous, and the fact is the floor is still viable. I would say that the CBOE trading floor, and I've been involved with a lot of exchanges a lot of years, the VIX pit and the S&P 500 option pit at the CBOE, probably the most viable, vibrant trading pits on trading floors in any place in the world. 2 or 3 things have really made a big difference in the industry. One is that the creation of these indexes that had existed for a long time, but when we started trading the S&P 500 futures contract, trading the options on the S&P 500 at the CBOE, and the advent of index mutual funds, pioneered by Vanguard, and then the creation of ETFs, which actually go back to the American Stock Exchange. So you have interesting things that have cross currents that have happened, and the creation of index mutual funds and ETFs, very much on indexes as well or on niches, have created tremendous accessibility to the markets for both individual and institutional investors. You don't have to pick individual stocks. You can get in and out, and all based on computerization. You couldn't have ETFs without computerization. You couldn't have the access to the markets without the electronification of the markets. And from a point of view of both individual and institutional investors, the markets have never been better, they've never been deeper, they've never been more transparent, and they've never been less expensive than they are today. And it all inures to the benefit of investors of all types. It's a wonderful thing to watch. And I think the liquidity in the markets, fostered by the Chicago exchanges in particular. So for example, whether it was the futures of the S&P at the CME or the options on the S&P 500 at the CBOE, allowed tremendous liquidity by major firms to make markets in not only individual stocks, but enormous baskets of stocks. And I think Chicago's played a very, very vital role in that. In fact, one of my favorite stories is in 1992, we had an unusual situation in Chicago. We had a situation where the river leaked. That was the way it was described in the newspaper. Some barge punched a hole in the riverbed, which led to these tunnels under the loop, and the water was flowing into the basements of the building, and we literally had to close the MERC and the Board of Trade and the CBOE because of the water that was flooding the basements and killing the electricity. And it turned out to be one of the slowest trading days of the year on the New York Stock Exchange. So here it wasn't Thanksgiving Friday, it wasn't any holiday, it's that Chicago markets closed and the big New York firms could not hedge their positions. And that told me that no matter what the New Yorkers would say about the issues around derivatives, that the big firms who made markets and made liquidity in the stocks stopped making those markets or held back dramatically because they couldn't hedge their positions intraday. One of the really important inflection points in the last 20 years, or a little bit more, is the fact that these member exchanges from all over the world, not just in the U.S., demutualized. It certainly didn't start in the U.S. It actually started in Australia, went to Europe, went to Asia. The U.S. was dead last because it was inimical to the interests of the member structure of these exchanges to demutualize. They lost their power. And yet, it was the only way that these institutions could survive in a very competitive world. And again, it was easier to have a demutualization, which meant instead of having a membership structure, they became corporations. The members got stock. But in most cases, outside the U.S., the members were the big banks. They weren't individuals. Demutualizing the U.S. was much more complicated because you had to get the individual members of the exchanges to give up their power to something that they couldn't predict. And in fact, I remember the CME was the first exchange to go public. I think it was in 2000. And I remember stories about people who had seats. And at CME, what they did is the equity of the exchange became the stock, but they kept the seats. They still have them today. And people would get the seats, they keep the seats, and they got stock. And I knew stories of people who sold the stock because they saw no value in it and kept the seats, which was exactly the wrong thing to do. By the time CBOE went public, we were very late to the game. One of the reasons CBOE was late to the game is that we had this historic relationship with the Chicago Board of Trade. And we had a battle over what was called the exercise right. It took 5 years of litigation to get out of it, and we couldn't demutualize until we got out of the Board of Trade litigation. And one of the things I'm most proud of is that we finally, in a very litigious situation, including court battles into the Delaware courts, made a settlement with the Board of Trade right before we tried to go public. It cost the CBOE $1 billion in stock and cash that allowed us to free ourselves from the historic hold that the Board of Trade had on the CBOE from its founding. But as a result, these exchanges became extremely successful and profitable. Again, you take a CBOE seat that was worth, I don't remember the exact number, it might have been $1 million right before our IPO, which today would be worth $8 million. That's in 10 years. So extraordinary growth, but it gave the exchanges the institutional flexibility for their management and their boards to do things. So one of the things I'm very proud about is one of the last things that I was involved in at CBOE was the acquisition of the BATS exchange. And the only way we could do that is because we were demutualized and because we could merge. And two wonderful things happened. One is that on the day of the merger, the close of the merger, the S&P 500 admitted us to the S&P 500, which was a wonderful thing. And the other thing, and I want to spend a couple of minutes on this, is my relationship with Ed Tilly. Because all of these things I talked about, going back 20 years or more, is that Ed Tilly and I became colleagues. He was a trader on the floor, and I was able to work with him. He embraced electronic trading, understood it, and also understood the political dynamic. And he helped work with me to get the acceptance of the hybrid system. And after the hybrid was operational, we worked together, and I invited him to join the management. And he became executive vice chairman, which was heresy in those days. You didn't have a guy leave the floor. and come into the management. But we did, and he worked together. And then when Ed Joyce, who was a great guy and worked with me as president, retired, Ed Tilley then later became president of the exchange, which was a wonderful thing. And we worked together. He was president and CEO, and I was chairman, and it worked great. He's done a great job, and we're still friends. And I admire the fact that he had the foresight to do what other floor people wouldn't even have thought of, and then say, not only do I understand the future, but I want to be part of management. So it's been a wonderful relationship, and I'm very proud that he took over as chairman on the day of the closing of the BATS merger, and has done a great job ever since. I'm happy to say that for me, retirement has been a lot of fun because it's not retirement. I've had a lot of opportunities to do lots of things, but the things that I'm enjoying most is working with my 3 sons, all of whom not only followed in my footsteps, but as I followed my father's footsteps. So each one is involved with a different financial firm, and it's very exciting to work with them. One is involved with the international stocks, as I mentioned, Cedar Street Asset Management, and a second son is involved with a new firm that is about to be launched. It's called Option Solutions, which is a firm that specializes in dealing with options for high net worth investors. And another son is involved with a wealth management business, which is still in its embryonic form. So it's very exciting for me because these are things I've known for my whole career, and not only do I enjoy doing them, but working with clients, but particularly working with each of my sons at the same time.
John Lothian News would like to thank those individuals who have contributed to our Markets Wiki Education GoFundMe campaign. Their financial assistance allows us to produce and distribute videos like this for our Open Outcry Traders History Project or the Path to Electronic Trading video series. Join them in supporting John Lothian News, capturing the history of our industry.